This is the House Energy, Utilities, and Telecommunications Committee. I call this meeting to order. I want to thank all the members for coming, and have a good number of people from the public here too. Thank you all for coming. There is one item I was going to talk about. Wanted to ask some people from the or anybody from the public to speak to for just a moment before we take up these two bills. About 4 or 5 years ago, we passed legislation that was signed into law regarding the television service, franchising of television service in the state. And I've had a couple questions come up about that. If is anybody here from AT&T? Do you mind come up and just a brief explanation of? I remember us passing that bill. I wasn't the chair at that time, but I've had some questions about how that works. If you don't mind, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you could just give us just a brief. Up until that time, as I recall,
they reviewed that bill again for years.
Yeah. Up until that time, the franchising was done by local governments,
right.
And that was a bill to change it, to streamline it, make it easier for all the entities involved. And here again, I don't want to put you on the spot as AT&T. It could be, but if you could just for the purpose of a couple people from the public who've come here have asked me about it, and I can't remember. If you could just kind of give us a brief explanation of how that works, and if an area, for example, if there's a city, I guess here's where I'm going. If there's a city that's not happy with the service that's provided by a company that is franchised in that area, what are the options? And I'm not trying to set anything up at all, just purely for information services.
If memory serves me correctly, they go to the office of Governor's Office. Thank you for reminding me to introduce myself.
All questions will come through the chair, please.
My name is Kevin Curtin with AT&T. If memory serves me correctly, but I need to review it. It's been years since I've looked at that legislation, but I believe it goes to the Office of Consumer Affairs. The complaints do, just like any other consumer complaint would.
Okay. Well, but then, as far as the franchising goes, can there be? And I can't even remember. I mean, can there be more than one? There can be more
yes.
than one. That is that was the whole thing, that there
exactly.
could be more than one provider and some competition in those areas.
Exactly. So it opened up those markets to non-exclusive franchises, and you can go to the state or you can go to the local government. There's two options in the law.
Okay.
So through the state, you go through the Secretary of State's office to get franchised, and then your local option is going to your local government to get franchised.
Okay.
So those are the two different options available. And since that law has passed, the options available to the consumers of our state have been enhanced greatly.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry to put you on the spot at the last moment, but I appreciate it. We have a couple of bills here, and I'm the primary. I think I may be the only sponsor on both of these bills. They both came up late. So I think the best thing would be, even though at least on the one bill, the franchise, or not franchise, but the 911 bill, I don't think I'll ask for a vote on that. But either way, I'm going to ask Vice Chairman Geisinger if you would chair, and I will go over and at your pleasure.
And while the chairman's waiting to be seated, I'd like to introduce the Burke County 4-H group that's here, Ag Group. Would you please stand? Let everybody see you, please. They are our future farmers, yes. Thank you. I suspect you know how sausage is made. You're about to see some more. Yes, Mr. Chairman. House Bill, which?
The 911 bill, please.
All right.
That's 557.
Yes. House Bill number 557, LC 287574ER. Please, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I left a copy of my bill. Leo, I think I left a copy. I had some notes on up there. I was actually afraid these young people were coming to testify against the bill, so I'm relieved of that. On this House Bill 557, I want to make sure everybody knows, where this has come from. Last year, the Senate had a study committee on funding for 911 services. And, of course, it's a very important issue. It involves public safety, involves, getting a quick response time when people have emergencies. That's what it's there for. Being able to respond to the calls and then be able to not only to respond to answering the call and getting the information, but then providing help. And then if any kind of help has to be dispatched, to get that help dispatched as quickly as possible. So it's an important issue. So this comes out of a study committee that was in the Senate last year, and I don't know just when they met. They met in the interim between, I think, the session last year and the session this year. And but I was not involved in that. That was a Senate study committee. I don't think anybody, maybe some of the members here attended some of those meetings. I don't know. I don't even think I had any notices on the meetings at all anyway. I mean, that's not anything against the Senate. It's their thing, but I wasn't involved. So at some point, the Senate, I think it was Senator Mullis, Chairman Mullis over there, who kind of spearheaded that study committee, decided, I think rightfully so, that since the bill deals with revenue, that it should be introduced in the House and first and work out of the House. So the people who were involved in the study committee in the Senate, who attended those meetings and provided information, and I don't know who all, but different industry people, maybe some of the 911 center people, I don't know who all, but I'm sure some of the industry people were involved in that, probably representatives representing some of the cities and counties or municipalities, I don't know, but probably so. They've been involved in that in the interim and through this session, and still working on trying to perfect the bill. And so therefore, since it is a complex issue, it's an important issue, the bill actually didn't get, I didn't have a copy of the bill. I didn't have legislation until very late, in fact, late last week. So that's what we have here. What we have here is House Bill 557, which I actually got from Legislative Council last week, and went ahead and introduced it on Thursday and had it read and for the first time and assigned to committee. So that's what we have here. It's and since that time, probably some of you, probably some of those folks here have raised questions and probably have called maybe some of y'all out and other members out to the hall to ask questions and voice concerns about the legislation as it affects them or the organization that they represent. So there's been a number of questions raised about it. And I just say all that in preface to the talking just a little bit about the bill, because even though it's got my name on it, I'm very happy to have told them that I would help with it, because it is a very important issue, and it's an issue that we've dealt with in this committee over a number of years. I think going back a long time ago when I first got elected, we were dealing with some of these issues relating to 911, enhanced 911, and the funding of it. So what we have here is a bill that, in my estimation, needs some work, and I'm not going to ask anybody to, not going to ask the committee to vote on it today. And we're going to my plan is for us to work on this bill in the interim and come back next year with a good bill that we've, everybody's not going to be, as y'all know, you can't necessarily make everybody happy. What you want to do is come up with something that's good for the people of Georgia, and in this case, something that provides a 911 service and the ability to get emergency service in the best way possible. So that's what we have here, and pretty much what we've done. I'm going to kind of look through my notes here, but I think the first change, I'm not going to go through every change, but basically we're saying that the fee would be $1.50 per month per telephone service provided by a telephone company. And then another later in the bill, and that's for the prepaid service, which is currently at 75 cents, and that was just added a couple of years ago. The prepaid wasn't in at all up until a couple of years ago, because it is sort of they're providing the same service, but it's sold in a different kind of way, and the fee has to be collected in a different kind of way. So the fee for that would go up to the same amount of $1.50, and and I think this is probably what has some people concerned. The money that's collected would go to the Department of Revenue instead of directly back to the the local governments that operate the 911 centers across the state. And that's something that we'll continue to look at as we study this. But I think probably it's a good idea, because I don't know, Lord only knows how many 911 centers we have across the state. I don't really know, but it's a logistical issue dealing with so many 911 centers. Somebody came to me a while ago and said that their county or city had a problem because their money was not coming back to them. Well, it's never their money. I mean, this is money that is coming from subscribers from across our state. It doesn't belong to any county, or it's money that's being dispersed back to them in a certain way, and this just changes the way it would be dispersed back to them. That's what that really amounts to, probably in a much more efficient way, I believe. And let's see, it also, here again, I could go through the bill and tell you the pages, but I think you can see them. I think the other thing is that as far as the money that goes back to the cellular companies, the wireless companies will decrease as far as their return. The return to them goes up for like 1 year to help get things started a little bit and improve, but then it starts going down and goes down something like 30 cents a cellular call. So anyway, what I would like, Mr. Chairman, I'll be glad to try to answer any questions. I have reviewed this bill over the last couple of days. I got a call on Friday, I think it was. Like I said, I just got the bill on Thursday, and then on Friday sometime I got a call from one of the local television stations wanting to interview me about it, which I would have done. It's just literally by the time I got the call, I think they were already doing their story. It was an live camera interview, and so. It's a piece of legislation that even though I would have done that, I will feel more comfortable after we have an opportunity as a committee to review it and perfect something instead of going out with something that really is not ready, in my opinion, for to take to the floor or even ask you all as members of the committee to vote on at this point. So anyway, I apologize for going on and on, but what I would like, Mr. Chairman, is with that, I'll be glad to try to answer any questions. But I did want to give this is my request to you, not to have full testimony. There's no reason to have that now. We can answer questions and ask that industry, the counties, the revenue department, everybody have a chance to have input in this as we go along. But there have been some questions and some issues that have been brought. And I would like to ask you to, if there's anybody here that would like to express those in a concise way, knowing that we may very well address them, or they may not be, but we're going to give them the opportunity for them to be addressed in a concise manner, then I would ask that you allow that to happen at this time.
Mr. Chairman, you do have a question from Representative Martin.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Geisinger, Chairman Parsons. You and I talked about this briefly yesterday, and I appreciate the way you've brought this forward and give the committee and folks time to weigh in. Do you know, I'm not familiar with the study committee's recommendation. It looks to me like in Section 1 of the bill, and then later on over on lines 52 through 56, it looks like we're trying to collect 911 fees on pure data lines. I understand they're trying to capture voice over IP, where you have a phone and it's getting there digitally. I understand that, but it looks like on the front they're trying to redefine a telephone service And then they're trying to actually collect that on what I would refer to as like a T1 line. Representative Dudgeon may have a DSL line or so forth. Do you know if that was the recommendation of the study committee? Are they trying to get to collect 911 fees on data lines, or are they just trying to collect the voice over IP service for a single, something that would be like a 1FR or 1FD?
It's a good question. I don't know. I haven't actually seen the recommendations from the study committee. I think probably what we're talking about is voice over internet. I know that I think one of the cable companies and the cable association came to me and said that to me, as far as the way that you would bill it, to me it's pretty straightforward whether you're a telephone company or a cable company. I mean, it's just channelization of lines over a multiplexer of some type. So I don't, but they will have the opportunity, and they may want to speak today. I don't necessarily agree with them that that's a problem for the cable people, but they think it is, and maybe it is. So. But as far as your question, I don't know what. I'm not sure if they came out of the. It probably did come out of their study committee, but I couldn't say for a fact that it did.
And just the other thing, and I'll leave it the chairman's good offices to get us the information. But I know that this is moving to the various local governments to the revenue commissioner. I know as of yesterday morning, Commissioner Riley had not been contacted relative to her staff and so forth, and that's not anything you know that is your lacking, Mr. Chairman. That's the folks that were bringing this to you that didn't appear that they got to the revenue commissioner.
Yeah, well, maybe it is lacking on my part, but probably more lacking on whoever the revenue department has over here watching their bills. So.
Yeah. No, I don't. I just mean I don't think they were aware that the study committee prior to it coming to the chairman. I don't think it was at all you, right. Mr. Chairman. I think that they weren't aware that of course, we also have a new revenue commissioner.
Right. Who's done a great job. I mean, she really is. But that's a good point. I mean, I would, I didn't even think in terms of notifying her because I didn't even think about it really. So kind of like forgetting somebody's birthday or something like that. I just didn't think about it.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Dudgeon has a question.
Well, Representative Martin actually got both of mine, but I just was around who we were trying to capture with the 911 fees, what the limit of, obviously the Vonages of the world, the voice over IP, I think is an intended target, but I guess we'll clarify in the future what the intended universe is. And about the State Revenue Commission, do we know what the motivation around sending it to the state instead of the locals is? Is there a problem we're trying to solve there? Are we trying to do it more fairly? Do we know why we're moving the revenue there?
Yeah. Well, again, Representative Dudgeon, I'll be glad to try to, to address it. I'm not the one that came up with, but I think it probably has to do with simplifying the process for the companies that actually collect it. I think instead of going to, and here again, I don't know how many there are across the state, but probably it's a matter of trying to simplify it and have one entity to do it. I believe that's where that's coming from.
Representative Carson.
Well, I think Chairman Martin and Representative Dudgeon stole my thunder. They asked my two questions. So now, with that, I would just make a comment. I think it would be, in all, as far as parity and fairness, it would make sense to charge 911 fees based on an outgoing device such as this can dial out via phone, or you can use text or whatever to reach the 911 operating facilities. It would make sense to only charge them one fee per month, as opposed to multiple fees for different ways of communicating. So, and Mike asked the question in regard to the DOR. I appreciate that.
I appreciate that. And here again, just as a note, we have a great committee here, and we have more and more people on it with technical backgrounds, and I'll certainly be, reaching out to all of you and input from the committee. As far as I'm concerned, you may not want to accept it this way, but as far as I'm concerned, this is the committee's bill. I'm doing it on behalf of the committee, and I see it as something important because of public safety and responding to emergencies and also, I mean, then beyond that, also then making sure that the money is there for the entities that need the money based on the demand, for that particular area. We can't. If there's an area that operates a service, and I'm not saying this is the case, but I mean, for example, if there's a center that's operating a 911 service, but because of where they're located or whatever, they're not getting the demand, then but there's an area where there's a much higher demand based on where they're located, the number of people that come there during the day, the traffic that comes through that area, and maybe it needs to be adjusted some. So,
Mr. Chairman, we have one more question from Representative Fraser.
okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate you holding off on this bill because I do have some concerns about it. My local counties are calling me, and I think the collection or the fees might differ a little bit for the smaller counties than they do for the larger counties because we cannot wait a year for, I'm not going to use the word term and reimbursement, but to get the fees collected because our budgets are limited. So I think we do need to look further into studying this because it's not a one-size-fit-all the counties right now, the way in its present form.
Thank you. I don't think it was ever the intent for them to wait for a year. I think that probably was a misprint in the bill. I mean, but certainly something we can look at and change. I don't think that was the intent for that to be a yearly. The actual fees wouldn't change. I mean, they would actually be getting more. The fee actually goes up for the prepaid, and here again, the purpose of it is to have better service and provide better funding for the 911 centers. But I understand the questions. I mean, I understand their concerns. So, if we had taken this bill and all of us didn't do anything but work on this bill, you didn't attend any other meetings or anything, all we did was work on this bill, and we got it perfected as we see it should be perfected within this committee. And we spent all of our time since last Wednesday doing that. And take it to rules, whether I took it there or Representative Carson or Chairman Geisinger or whoever took it, I think we would still have a problem getting it through. So I think the best thing to do is just to continue to work on it. And I have believe me, I'm not locked in to anything on here. We can work on it and try to perfect something. So.
Please.
I'd just like to, Mr. Chairman, just give you a comment. And in Burke County, alone, we collected $379,000 in fees for 911 calls, but our actual cost was $479,000. So we actually had to increase that using property tax.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we've had several people that have signed up. If you think it would be of value, we can hear from them. If not, we can wait and do it through a study committee at a later date.
I think it would be of value to hear but if the chair would make it clear that we're not voting on the bill today, we're not going to vote on it tomorrow. The next day is something that we're looking at for next year, and that if you made it very clear to them that we're talking about just a 2-3 minutes at the most, just a basic what your basic idea is, what if you have a problem, if you're for the bill, why you're for it, but if there's something in here in particular that you see an issue with, to identify that. But we're not talking about any lengthy over 2 or 3 minutes. That's what I would request the chair anyway.
I'd be happy to do that, Mr. Chairman.
If so, I will leave this chair and somebody can come up here.
Did you, John? Okay. Mr. Robert Highsmith, please.
Where do you want me, Mr. Chairman?
Right there at the mic, if you will, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Martin. I'm Robert Highsmith, and I represent the City of Atlanta, and I wanted to provide a little bit of an additional background to what the chairman provided, but first to thank him for taking on this difficult issue and beginning the process over here in the House of having some of the conversations that started in the Senate. And I want to very quickly talk about some of the purposes of the bill. I was very grateful to hear about the situation in Burke County because it is the exact same situation the City of Atlanta faces, where general fund revenues are having to supplement the operation of the 911 center because the fees don't cover it, and the City of Atlanta takes more 911 calls than any other public safety access point in the city. And I just want to state very clearly what the goals of the bill were. The goals of the bill were to make sure that everyone who has a device accessing 911 is on parity with everyone else as far as what they're paying into the system. a lot of the technological descriptions in the bill, as far as how the telephone service was defined, were outdated. A lot of that is done by software and digitalization now. Representative Dudgeon knows more about that than I do, of course. But the goal of that definition was not, Representative Martin, to charge data, but to try to collect every single way that someone might access 911, make sure they're paying a fee. If a business has many lines that they're channelizing on their side of the exchange, and even exchange isn't the right word anymore, that they will be able to, that they will be contributing their fair share. The increasing the fee on prepaid to bring it into parity with what everyone else is paying was another goal, just to make sure that everyone is paying their fair share into the system, and to make sure that the public safety answering points are getting as much as they can in order to pay for that service. There's no intention, as Chairman Parsons said, on keeping the money for a year. I mean, that'd be an easy thing to work on, as the chairman said, to make sure that particularly the smaller counties are getting that more than once a month. But those are the overarching goals of the bill, was to try to help systems like Burke County, frankly, without increasing the fee, which I think would have an even tougher sledding, Mr. Chairman, without increasing the fee, to make sure that everyone who's using the service is paying in a fair share. And I'm grateful to you, Chairman Geisinger, and to Chairman Parsons for bringing the issue into the House, where it so that those conversations can continue.
We all carry one of these around. The 911 fee, I'm sure, is charged in regards to where we live. Is that correct?
For postpaid service, it is the billing address of the service, Mr. Chairman.
The billing address.
Yes, sir.
So if somebody moves in, we'll capture them.
Wherever their service is billed. And of course, people can have my services billed to my office. Now, I both live and work in the city of Atlanta, but those it's tagged to the billing address of the cellular service that you have for postpaid service. For prepaid, it's at the point of sale.
Representative Martin.
I know that.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, now that Chairman Geisinger and Chairman Parks won't get too much in, but to get my hands around this, then there's not really a way to capture that otherwise. In another committee or in conversation around about this today, I dial a lot of people with a 404 area code that I know, in fact, live in Dallas, Texas, or actually one guy, San Jose, California. That's where they're at most of the time, but they're being billed in Atlanta, and I know Atlanta's short fees. I'm just using that as an example. So it's where the service is billed. So in many cases, there's probably a lot more people in Atlanta during the day than live here. So it's fair to say that the 911 calls that are generated on a 24-hour period, many of those may be coming from mobile devices that are in fact billed to other municipalities. So it's really a question of the fees aren't following the need for service is the one thing and there's not really a way that we know of to capture that.
We're hopeful that we can find as many ways as we can, Representative Martin, but you're absolutely right that the problem is at its worst in the city of Atlanta, where people are not paying into the system but nonetheless are accessing it and using it.
Or population. I mean, to use my example, I mean, 40,000 people live in the city limits of Alpharetta, but I think there's over 120,000 that work there. Maybe it's just over 100 now, but 3 times that same thing you would have there. All right, so the last question just here, and not to belabor the point, so on those lines I referred to earlier, you don't believe they're trying to capture just solid data lines into a data server. You think they're trying to capture lines that are into a DSL line where you break up the channels and channelize what would normally be a data submission line.
I'm quite certain that they're not trying to capture data submissions, and the again, the definition again came from the industry,
sure,
and the only goal is to capture voice service.
Okay,
Representative Martin.
The code section makes me think we're pretty good on data. So.
Good, thanks. That helps a lot.
No, I think John Thompson, Representative Carson, Wade.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me ask it in a little bit more layman term, non-technical. Is the intention, because I have both texting and voice on here, is the intention for me to pay $3 or $1.50?
The intention is absolutely for you to pay $3, Representative Hamilton. We're just trying to figure out how to get there. No, I'm just teasing. But
You used to be my friend.
Representative Hamilton, there's no intent in this bill to reach beyond voice. Voice access to 911. We understand that technology is on its way.
That's fine.
Where,
I just want to make sure that, because I've been told the way it's written that that's not what happens, and so I'm just asking for the intent. Thank you.
The intent is voice only, Mr. Chairman. Representative Hamilton.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chuck Clay, please.
I know I can be faster than I agree. Chuck Clay, I'm here representing Cobb County. Just want to say, for purpose of the record, the county has invested a lot, has an enormous, like many places, pride in both the efficiency and the professionalism of their 911. And certainly, as they have just initially looked at this, we're concerned about anything that would potentially either dismantle or curb or cut back, you will, the ability to control their own fate. We'll work absolutely with you, anybody on this committee, representatives of the industry, as we go forward. But just want to start with the idea, let folks know that certainly Cobb County has angst about anything that would look like that it might be diverting that revenue that they've generated elsewhere for distribution. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Clay, and yes, you are quite quick. Deborah, is it Neistat? Nesbitt. Oh, Nesbitt. ACCG.
Yes.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deborah Nesbitt here representing the Association of County Commissioners. We have participated in both the Senate and the Governor's study committees on this issue, and we very much appreciate you bringing this and opening it up for us to work on over the interim. We realize that there are issues with the collection and the auditing of 911 funds, and we really look forward to working with the committee over the summer to come up with some recommendations that we can bring back to the General Assembly next year.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for coming. Mr. Greg Whitaker?
Whitaker, yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the committee for letting me speak. I'm Greg Whitaker, the president of the Georgia 911 Directors Association. Pretty much mirror what Deborah Nesbitt just said from the ACCG. I've gotten a lot of calls from a lot of 911 directors since Friday, a lot of concerns about everything that's been discussed in here, and it's pretty much all been said. What I'd like to do is extend an invitation to everyone, Mr. Chairman, we as the Georgia 911 Directors Association, Georgia NENA, the Georgia National Emergency Number Association, Georgia APCO, the Association of Public Safety Professionals, we would like to help in any way we can to fill whatever need, to answer any questions. We'd be more than happy to work with you on rewording of the bill or the next bill or whatever, but I wanted to extend the invitation.
We appreciate that, and I'm sure that you'll be called on during the interim.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Question.
GMA, please. For the record, please identify yourself and who you're
Rushi Patel with the Georgia Municipal Association, and like our counterparts at ACCG, we're taking part in that study committee with the Senate over the interim, and we appreciate the committee taking up this bill and Chairman Parsons for introducing it. It's a very complicated issue, and we very much appreciate Chairman Parsons for keeping everyone in the loop and working with everybody in the interim on this legislation, particularly the funding on how it comes back to the 911 systems in the state, and we'll be glad to keep up with the committee and with Chairman Parsons as we go forward in the summer.
We look forward to that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, is there anything that you want to add?
To answer your question, Mr. Chairman, no, not really. I think we pretty well covered it. Thank you.
You might as well stay in place because you have another bill. We do have one question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Just one last question on
from
557.
Representative Carson.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one more question, Mr. Chairman. Given where the bill is, and again, I appreciate you bringing it forward, what is your inclination as to how to move forward? Would you prefer to have? Are you going to be calling committee meetings over the summer, or is that yet to be determined, or what have you?
You know, I think it's yet to be determined. Secretary Carson, you're the secretary of the committee. I think what we'll just have some conversations, Chairman Geisinger and amongst us. And I'll put it this way: I'll take suggestions from the committee over the next couple of days. We're going to be here for about 2 more weeks, 2.5 weeks, something like that. So I think we have ample time between now and the time the session ends, during which time I do not expect us to do anything with this, and so we have ample time to kind of decide on a course to go forward with. But thank you, appreciate it.
Any further questions of the chairman? Hearing none, Mr. Chairman, we will let that one rest until the next session. House Bill 556.
All right, thank you, Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. There is a fund that is administered by the Public Service Commission called the Universal Access Fund that's set up to help companies that have chosen to be regulated by the PSC in the state. And I know we have some newer members, and some of you go back a good ways, but there are a lot of telephone companies in the state of Georgia. A lot more, people think of AT&T or Verizon. What's the one up in? There's another pretty big one. I can't think. But there are a lot of different telephone companies in the state of Georgia, and from a bill that we passed, a law that was enacted back in 1996, I believe, and then further amended about 4 years ago by a bill that I had. We changed the process a little bit and changed the process for being able to get funds, to ask the Public Service Commission for funds from that Universal Service Fund. The Universal Access Fund.
Mr. Chairman, you may want to enlighten some of our newer members as to what the fund is.
Well, the fund is there. That's a good question, really.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
And I say that because I am a some of you know, I am a telephone. I consider myself a telephone man. That's what we used to call people who did telephone work back in the day. I went to work for the phone company, what we used to call the phone company, the Bell System, in 1966, and I was a telephone installer repairman, and did that for a number of years. Left and went to college and did it in the summer, and so I've been involved in that kind of thing going back a long ways. And there is an obligation to, I think we maybe even changed that a couple of years ago, but basically there's an obligation of a telephone company that is regulated by the PSC to provide telephone service to make sure that anybody can get basic 1FR, 1FR telephone service. And, we were always trained that, the term we always used was the little lady, and I know I have seen this myself. The little lady lives in the house up at the end of the hall. You got to get her telephone service. So there's an obligation for those companies that are regulated to do that, and without regard really to the expense of it. Sometimes it's much more expensive. It's much easier to go to an apartment in Dunwoody or something and reconnect a phone. Somebody's moved out, somebody comes back in and puts service back in there. There's just so much cost involved in that. But if there is a new subdivision built, or there is somebody that lives up way up a road that's they haven't had service up there, it can be expensive. So it's something that's put in there for those companies to be able to recover. That's not really the cost recovery process, but it's there to help them to make sure they have the infrastructure in place to do that and to take care of providing. Here again, that's not the cost recovery model or process, but to make sure that they can provide that service. And when, you know, if there's a storm that comes through, I mean, different things can be very costly. So that's what it's there for. And we've had legislation. We actually passed legislation out of this committee that went to rules about 4 years ago, something like that, that would have done away, would completely done away with that universal access fund. And you know, that just depends on, you know, that's something that every member has to decide for themselves, whether or not that would be a good thing or not. It is, I will say this, it is something that telephone subscribers, many telephone subscribers are subsidizing that for other companies, some of those independent telephone companies in particular. But I do know, I mean, I know that they have situations and needs that in a lot of those areas, and the particular customer base is different too. I mean, they have a different customer base than in Metro Atlanta, for example. But there's different ways of looking at it, and that's the kind of thing that each and every member has to decide for themselves. But
Mr. Chairman, is this similar to the rural electrics? The rural electrics were, you know, they would string a line 1.5 miles, 2 miles down the road just to serve one customer. That's what you're basically saying.
Well, it's a different process, but yeah, I mean, it's I think basically it's there to cover that kind of situation for those companies. It's a different process. I mean, it is literally setting up a fund that those companies can go to the Public Service Commission and request, you know, X amount of money from, because we've got these issues and we have these problems that we need to address, and we have these costs that we need to cover. And I think that from what I understand is there's been a lot of improvement over the last couple of years. There were some abuses that have been identified to the committee here. Again, time passes so quickly, but I think that was about 4 years ago, something like that. But they weren't. It wasn't every company that did that, but there have been some abuses. And to my knowledge, anyway, the PSC has done a good job, I believe, of, you know, they're the ones that kind of administer that, and they have to approve those. And I think they've done a good job of making sure that to the extent possible that you know, the requests that they honor are based on real need. So that's the situation. I will say I think that we need to continue to look at that. I drew this legislation up last week, put it in the same day I put the 911 bill in, and this particular bill just strikes part of one line. It's on. Let's see if I can even find it. It's on page 3. On lines 80 and 81, and it says currently the law reads, the Commission shall have the authority to make adjustments to the contributions or distribution levels based on your yearly reconciliations, and then it goes on to say currently, and to order further contributions or distributions as needed between companies to equalize reasonably the burdens of providing basic local telephone service throughout Georgia. I don't think that language is needed in there. It's my understanding that I can't speak for the PSA. It's my understanding that it's not something that's being used. I think it's almost editorializing, and it says that to reasonably equalize the burdens. I mean, burdens is something, you know, that's something each and every person has to decide what's a burden. To me, we're putting in statute that they have this burden and has to be relieved. But so that's all this bill does, would just be striking that last part of that sentence.
Did the Public Service Commission bring this to you?
No, this is my legislation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Now, nobody brought this to me but myself. And here's the bottom line on this, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. I think that you know, I'm a telephone man, and I know, and these telephone companies that operate under a regulated model, you know, they're the closest thing to what model I worked under back in 1966 through 1970. They're the closest thing. You know, even that's not exactly the same today, but it's the closest thing that I worked under, and it was a different time, a different way of doing things. We would literally, I remember one time having to tell a customer, and I don't know what they did after I left, but literally telling a customer they had to take. There used to be these little things, a little plastic thing that people would put on the receiver of their old telephone, you know, like gold or silver or something like that. And you know, probably didn't cost hardly anything, but I remember having to tell a customer one time that they had to take that off because that was a property. That phone was the property of the bell system, and you didn't have you couldn't modify that phone in any way. We couldn't put in jacks. There used to be a different kind of jack, not the RJ45, what do we have today, but a 4-pronged jack. And we literally stopped putting those in at one point because that would have lessened the incentive for people to buy an extension. If they put jacks in this room, that room, they'd carry the phone around to the different rooms. So we stopped that. You can't put jacks in anymore. It's got to be a telephone. If you want another one, we'd be more than happy to put another one in for, I think it was something like $1.50 a month or something like that. So what I'm saying really is, I mean, I have a lot of respect for these guys that are in these independent telephone companies under the regulated or the non-regulated model. And I think we need to, and the language is in here now is language that came out of a bill that I actually sponsored about 4 years ago. So I can't come here and blast, necessarily what we have in here now. But I think it's something that I want the independent telephone companies to know that this committee has the interest of we're interested in what you do. We're interested in you providing a service and continuing to be able to provide a service, but we also have the interest of the customers, and not necessarily the customers. That's not correct claim. We're interested in the citizens of this state. Now, if they're your customers or whoever else, so we're interested in the citizens of this whole state, whether they're there in your area, in Metro Atlanta or whatever. And this whole universal access fund is something that we can change. We can change it. It can be changed by Georgia statute, and we will continue to look at that. I want them to know that I do understand many of their problems. I haven't, I haven't had to put a telephone in for the little lady up the creek for a long time, but I do know what it's like. I remember going out and stringing the C-wire and being out there all day and having to ask for somebody else to come out to help with it, and you always dreaded, especially in the middle of the winter, you always dreaded getting what we called a new job, and that was to do something like that where there was nothing there, and you had to spend the day out there, freezing to death. And so I have a lot of respect for them. I'm not going to move with this bill. I do want to just establish that it's something we need to keep in mind. We need to continue to look at, and not just the citizens who are subscribers of those companies, but that we also have citizens in Metro Atlanta who are subsidizing a lot of that service. It just needs to be looked at very carefully. And with that, I'm not going to withdraw the bill, but I don't ask for any action to be taken on this, Chairman.
Are there any questions of the chairman?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chairman Geisner. Chairman Parsons, I just have to say it's gotten to be exquisitely complicated in its simplicity. As you know, we have so many people now throughout the state that have access to technology, the internet, and with that being said, I've been inundated with calls and emails. They are policy wonks now. These are young, bright folk that ask real simple questions like they review every bill that we have.
Oh, good.
And they'd like to know where are the figures that we have. This is well intended, but there are no figures here to have a baseline reference. And they'd like to have a frame of reference as to where are some of the figures that we can use that they can actually see. And I would hope that going forward we can kind of put that in, some hard and fast figures as a frame of reference, so that we can actually know exactly where we are and what we're looking at. We have the Universal Fund, as you know, that was a battle getting that done. And so many folk are not a fan of it, but we have no figures there. And just like on line 17, all telecommunications companies holding a certificate of authority, they can issue, again, there are no facts or figures there, and a charge for each working telephone number, but a charge under what specificity, and these are the questions that I get. So that's why I'm sharing that it would be good if we could really flesh all that out.
Well, we left a lot, which it needed to be. We left a lot to the Public Service Commission as far as how to administer this, instead of locking things down. And here again, to my knowledge, and I know that I think there's actually some legal action, so which I'm not involved in whatsoever. But I couldn't comment on that whatsoever. But I don't. That has nothing to do with this. I can tell you that whatever is happening in courts, if there is anything still happening, has nothing to do with this whatsoever. But as far as figures, I mean, those can be obtained from the Public Service Commission, I believe.
Thank you.
Who is that? Oh. Mr. Chairman, if there are no other questions of the members of the committee, and since you had indicated that you do not want action on this legislation today, I'm sure that you will create a couple of study committees, or at least one, to move on both of these pieces of legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will do that. We'll get together before day 40, and we'll get together. I want to thank if I may, I would ask you to end the meeting here in a minute, to adjourn the meeting, but I would like to say, if you give me the opportunity, that this is, well, it's not necessarily the last meeting. I mean, I don't know what's coming to us from the Senate, so we could very well have some more legislation coming over. But one thing I didn't do, and I'm going to here again, this would be your prerogative to do this. We have, I think, one new member that we had never introduced. He was assigned late to the committee. So if you would, Mr. Chairman, if you would call on Representative Raffensperger, is that it? If you would introduce yourself and tell us where you...
Representative Raffensperger, would you introduce yourself, tell us who you represent, and anything that we need to know about you? And your microphone's on.
It's not that big of a room, is it? Brad Raffensperger, House District 50, City of Johns Creek, primarily, North Fulton.
And what were you doing before you got elected?
I am still doing it. I own a specialty contracting business. I'm a structural engineer.
And were you elected to any office?
I was elected special election, House District 50, and prior to that I was on the City Council of Johns Creek.
That's what I was searching for. City Council.
Is that a good thing?
Oh, yes, always. A training ground.
Mr. Chairman, just a little point of personal privilege, if I may, before, and this has nothing to do with these bills or this legislation, but as we sit here in this room, this actually was the room that the industry committee, what used to be called the industry committee, sat in, and changed the name of it a few years ago, and so I'm really happy that we're able now that they have modified this room, that we can have our full meetings in here, and they have the cameras, and they set up the new microphones and everything like that. But just a point of personal privilege, other than saying how much I appreciate you all. And this has nothing to do, but just across the street there, at the I think it's is it Episcopal Church across the street? I forget which kind it is. But every day we come in. I think that's Washington Street over there, whatever street that is. Drive in there, and usually, it's filled with school buses from around the state. The kids coming in here, we know what it's like. We come in here, and the ones we had here, it's so great to have them here. So we have the kids coming in over there, and then right in front of the church, we have the homeless people that are over there every morning, and they're all covered up. This time of year, covered up in their blankets, and they have their cardboard little structures, and I guess they probably give them some food and stuff over there. And I just very briefly, my wife and I stopped for gas on Sunday evening, and there was a car that I could immediately identify. There was somebody homeless was living in that car, blankets and all kinds of stuff in there. And I filled up, and as I was getting ready to leave, there was a young lady walked out to the car, and she had 3 children with her. I think the oldest was probably about 10. And the kids, it was just unbelievable. They were obviously homeless. They actually had out-of-state license plates, so they were either going back there or coming from there, and it was a neighboring state. And so anyway, the kids were so great. I mean, they were like helping her. They were cleaning the windows, great attitudes. It was almost unbelievable that these kids were basically living out, who probably are living out of that car, and who knows how far they'd traveled that day, and probably just going into the quick trip to go to the bathroom and maybe get some kind of a little snack or something. But regardless of even how they were behaving, we have, this committee's made up of Democrats and Republicans, and we all have our different ideas and philosophies within our parties, even about how to help people. But the main thing is that we all have our ideas about how to help people. We all do, and sometimes it's a little different. I mean, any of us can give money to somebody that's in need or something like that, but we have our different. But so sometimes when I see things like that, I question some of my own philosophies about things, and I'm happy that other people have other ideas, because it is important that we all we have different ideas about how to address things like the homelessness and families. Maybe my wife said, she could have been on the run. I mean, she could have been an abusive husband. I mean, you don't know what, you just don't know what kind of situation. I couldn't get that family, I couldn't get that mother and those kids off my mind all evening. I really couldn't. And they've been on my mind all week. But we have it right over here, right here where we see it every day. So I'm sorry to run on and on about it, but just like to make sure that we all keep in mind that there are people out there that are hurting and have many, many problems every day as we come down here. I know we do, and we're fortunate to hear the preacher of the day every day. But we really need to be mindful that there's people that, hunger is a different thing to them. I'm hungry right now because I haven't had lunch. My hunger is a completely different hunger than those children and that mother would have had when I saw them on Sunday. So with that, I'll shut up, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to update you on that area where those folks are sitting back there. That used to be the minority office, that is the Republican office, back in the early 70s when I was here. And where you're sitting used to be the minority leader's office. We just had these two. We had 403 and whatever this one is, that door. That was it. But then we didn't have offices across the street either.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I
Thank you,
appreciate
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
If there is no other comment, or this meeting is adjourned.